So I've been playing Marauders since the closed tests in mid to late 2022, and I just wanted to preface everything that I'm about to say in this video by saying that I love this game. I've loved it since the first time I played it, it's one of my favorite games, and it always will be. I've sunk hundreds of hours into it since I started playing, and I want to see it succeed, but it's far from perfect. So just keep in mind, every piece of criticism here comes from a place of love and genuinely wanting to see this game improve. Also, if you just want to hear my thoughts and feelings on the player count, lack of communication, and lack of updates, go ahead and skip to the timestamp on screen to skip all of the general review stuff. With that out of the way, let's get started. What is Marauders? The simplest way to describe Marauders is Escape from Tarkov in space. As an extraction shooter, it's hard not to compare it to Tarkov, given that there are a lot of similarities, and the devs over at Small Impact Games, SIG for short, have talked about their experiences a lot with Tarkov in the past. You gear up, load into raids, fight other players and AI, and either survive and make it out with what you've got, or die and lose everything. Marauders tries to set itself apart by putting you in an alternate dieselpunk universe where World War I never ended, eventually leading to the destruction of the planet and forcing humanity to the stars. You play as a little space goblin called a Marauder, trying to scrape together an existence by killing, salvaging, and looting your way through the remnants of various space stations, frigates, and outposts full of raiders, soldiers, and other Marauders. Honestly, there's not a lot of lore here, at least going off of what's in-game, but it's an interesting setting, and everything just has this eerie vibe to it that I love, because I can't get it anywhere else. Say what you want about the rest of the game, but it has atmosphere, and I haven't played any other games that let me creep around a decrepit space station in an alternate history 1992 with an Uzi. Overall, it's a unique feel, if a bit weird at times. Marauders can't seem to really decide if it wants to be a hardcore extraction shooter or more arcadey, which is reflected in the weird mix of COD-like fast movement paired with the erratic recoil system and an extremely fast time to kill. The same as pretty much every other extraction shooter, you'll gear up and then load into a raid, either solo or with a team. Unlike other extraction shooters though, in Marauders you load into your ship initially, as opposed to straight into a map. If you've purchased or crafted a ship, you can load in with that, otherwise by default you load into a rust bucket, the basic ship. Not a lot of armor, basic gun, and looks that live up to its name. But it does the job because you don't start in a level, you'll have to fly there. When you spawn in, you'll be in an open area of space with various points of interest, AI ships, and player ships scattered around. Space combat is a thing that exists here, but it feels like someone went, hey, I have this idea for space combat and ships, then put it in the game and promptly forgot about it. 9 times out of 10, flying your ship to a point of interest just feels like another loading screen before you get to the actual game. Ships have weapons and you can fight other players, but it usually just evolves into you both circle strafing around each other until one of your ships takes enough hits to actually disable it, at which point you can escape to a pod to either retreat or try to breach your enemy's ship to fight them in it. Breaching can be fun, but ship combat just isn't. It sounds like a good idea, but there's not enough depth here to want to do it often, leading most players, including me, to just bring the rust bucket by default since it's free and rush to a point of interest to bypass space combat entirely. Again, you can bring a better ship in with better weapons, but there's not really a reason to. If you bring a good ship in, that means you also have to get it back out. If you die in raid, it's gone. If you pod out of a POI instead of backtracking to your airlock to leave in your ship, it's gone. Honestly, ships in space combat are decent enough ideas, but they're undercooked to the point where I'd be totally fine if they just weren't in the game at all at this point. Maybe they'll be fleshed out at some point in the future, but I'm not holding my breath. After you've trudged your way through space and find a point of interest, you can enter it by either docking your ship or breaching in with a pod, depending on the POI itself. Once you're in, this is where you'll be looting, shooting, fighting AI and other players, completing most quests, extraction shooter stuff. Gameplay-wise, it feels fine, I guess. Levels look good and have a great sense of atmosphere, and the core gameplay loop of trying to fight your way through these areas, finding loot, and surviving long enough to make it out is solid. Marauders feels really good, for the first little while at least. It's easy to lose yourself in wanting to do more raids to get more kills, more loot, level up your traders, all that stuff. Then after a while, you start to see the cracks. The AI is exceptionally stupid and downright boring to fight, with the exception of bosses, who will insta-aimbot your face the second they see the tiniest sliver of your head, just like Tarkov's bosses. General enemies have a few very limited loot pools, so after the first few hours, there's no real thrill or point in even looting them, unless you really want to grab their ammo or snag the single bandage or copper coin they might be carrying. Movement in most animations feel stiff, and in some cases animations are downright broken for months on end, like the original crosser reload. Almost all of them feel like placeholders, which, yeah, early access and all that, but there's some stuff like eating food having an old bandaging animation in that broken crosser reload that feels a little too rough, even for early access. Extracts and airlocks get camped regularly, which is what it is, and what it is a whole other conversation, but either way it's discouraging for new players. Overall, it's exceptionally frustrating to see issues that are already present in other games in the genre also be present here, especially where solutions exist, particularly when it comes to AI, loot, and airlocks.
Fuck you, you fucking bitch!
You can level up in Prestige, but prestiging is pointless past the first one or maybe two if you really want to, and there's really no quests or progression to work for to keep you playing. Sure, you can level up traders, but you can also find all of their loot in-game pretty easily. Zero to Hero might be a placeholder, but it's currently the one and only questline in the game that should give people a reason to play, and it's bad. You can only load into the same maps, with the same AI, with the same loot, and hit so many vaults before you can't find a reason to load in. Let's go back to that whole early access thing for a sec. Something I've seen a lot in the Marauders Discord, as well as in Steam reviews, is the tendency to use, but the game's in early access, as a way to deflect criticism of the game or excuse its problems. A game in early access is, obviously, still in development. You shouldn't be playing an early access game and expecting it to be perfect and have no flaws. That's just not how it works. But a game being in early access doesn't mean that it can't be criticized. It doesn't mean that you can't talk about its problems or be disappointed with how it's going. At the end of the day, Marauders is live on Steam, and people have paid money for it. Early access or not, the game is for sale, and live 24/7 for people to play. For a game like this to succeed, new features and content being added needs to be balanced with refining what's already there, and giving people reasons to stick around and keep playing, otherwise the bottom's gonna fall out. Which brings us to the current state of the game, specifically its player count. Questions about the declining player base come up daily in the game's Discord server, on Steam reviews, in the Steam forums, on Reddit, pretty much everywhere. Which is understandable, given that the game peaked at just over 14,000 players when it released in early access in October 2022, and that number has, to put it bluntly, nosedived. Historically, whenever SIG has addressed the player count, be it on Discord or Reddit or wherever, it always feels like those concerns are brushed aside. Responses have mostly waffled between stuff like, yeah, our player base is rapidly and steadily declining, but you guys just don't understand that the game is in early access. When we fully release, it'll totally bounce back and be fine. We're not going anywhere. Hunt had a low player count too, look where it is now. And, well, we're getting X amount of players daily, don't pay any attention to the current players in Steam because it doesn't show the full picture. And it's great that SIG thinks they're not going anywhere, but the reality is that most of their players are, and the more time that passes, fewer and fewer of them are coming back. For a quick point of comparison, here's a screenshot of Marauders' historical player count from the early access release in October 2022 through to now. And here's a screenshot of Hunt's historical player count during a similar period from their early access launch in February 2018 through to October 2019. Yeah, Marauders isn't Hunt. While SIG might have meant that they want Marauders to gain popularity over time, that pretty obviously isn't happening at the moment, and it really isn't a good comparison to make once, let alone multiple times. Let's look at some specifics, shall we? There are a few sites out there that you can use to get historical player data. We're going to be looking at data from SteamDB. You can also check out Steam charts if you want. We're specifically going to be looking at daily average players, just for context. I'm recording this in May 2024, so in the past 30 days, Marauders has had, on average, 167 players online at any given time. Looking back further, in April, that number was 179. In March, it was 189. I'll throw all of the numbers up on screen so you all can see them, because they do seem to show a pretty clear, steady decline. There are little bumps, usually from updates, and then it drops back down. The issue, though, is that those lows sure do seem to be getting lower. Looking at the historical timeline seems to show it pretty clearly, too. Some of SIG's responses to this have been interesting, to say the least. I touched on them a bit earlier as well, but I wanted to highlight a more recent example. Here's a screenshot of a member of SIG addressing the numbers and specifically stating that, actually, the population has gone up since last summer. Quote, last year, instead of 300 plus, we only had 100 to 50 players. Looking back to summer 2023 on Steam charts, I see an average of 1,449 players in May, 538 in June, 683 in July, and 1,151 in August. Now, I know we're only in May of this year so far, but none of this year's numbers really even come close. I'm not sure if this is just some corporate PR optimism and they're just hoping nobody's actually looking into what they're saying too deeply, or maybe I'm understanding, but a lot of SIG's responses to this stuff just seem completely detached from reality. I'll be the first to admit that I don't know a lot about game development, but maybe playing video games for nearly 3 decades and streaming and creating content around them has given me a bit of perspective. And respectfully, I don't think you can launch a game, lose almost all of your players, and burn all of the goodwill you had from people willing to believe in and invest in your game, and then expect that they'll magically reappear for updates or 1.0 release, especially if the entire early access period has been disappointing. Something that's Met the Doc, or DOC, or however you want to pronounce it, a member of SIG's community team. Anyway, something that he said a few months ago really stuck with me. He said something along the lines of, "We can't patch in a player base, guys," in response to concerns about the low player count. And hey, you know what? That's fair. SIG might not be able to patch in a player base, but they can focus on implementing things that have lasting value beyond 1 to 2 weeks post-wipe and give players something to work towards, something to keep playing for, something that brings them back. Which leads me to updates. Let's get something out of the way up front. SIG is a small team. There's something like 3 or 4 core developers, plus the community team and some QA staff. With a small team, updates being a little slower is completely understandable. However, the update schedule for this game has been agonizingly slow as of late, even for an early access game with a small team. Let's look back at 2023 for a sec. In 2023, Marauders got the following updates. I'll pop them up on screen for you. So that's 5 major updates: Red Baron, United Allies, Excavation, Plunder, and Guilds, plus a bunch of smaller updates and hotfixes and stuff like dev blogs. Now, let's take a little look at 2024 so far. Again, we're only in May. March 13th, Guilds 1.0 patch number 1. And that's it, in terms of actual updates to the game. We got a dev blog on February 8th, going over some of what's to be included in the aptly titled Retribution update, and given a release window between March and April. The small patch in March that was some new animations and attempted bug fixes, and that's it, apart from news on May 7th that finally confirmed that the Retribution update had been delayed. We'll be going more into SIG's incredibly disappointing lack of communication in a bit, because there's a lot to talk about there, but looking back at last year's updates versus what we've gotten so far this year, the difference is pretty stark. In the 5th dev blog that was posted on July 15th, 2023, SIG detailed how they were, quote, moving away from massive quarterly updates to smaller incremental changes to add depth at a faster rate in order to prevent stale and repetitive gameplay. Hey, that sounds pretty good, doesn't it? And it was. SIG decided that they would commit to a patch every 2 weeks, and every 8th week would be a new feature update. Personally, I loved being able to play more regularly and have smaller changes to try out and give feedback on. Looking back on the updates that we got for the rest of the year, it certainly seems to have paid off in terms of actually getting new stuff out the door. Unfortunately, that update schedule was pretty short-lived, and everything went to shit after the September 14th release of the Plunder 1.3 update. After that, apart from devblog number 8 on September 20th, there was 0 official communication from SIG until November 15th, at which point they finally confirmed that the Guilds update, originally scheduled for October, had been delayed as a result of restructuring. Details are fairly scarce, but it seemed to be a result of the restructuring that Team 17, Marauders' publisher, was going through, which affected their QA team that apparently had some involvement in SIG's QA process for Marauders. The Guilds update did finally come out in December, though. On February 8th, 2024, SIG posted their 9th devblog, confirming that they were moving away from the previous update cadence as it had become too difficult to maintain and didn't allow them to make the larger content changes and feature additions that they wanted to. Which, hey, that's understandable. In the same blog, they gave the release window of March or April for the Retribution update. March came and went, no update, or even news about it. April came and went as well, with no update and no news. Finally, on May 7th, SIG broke their silence, confirming that not only was the update delayed, but also that they had no news as to a new release window, that the update may need to be broken up into multiple chunks, and that they may need to run 1 or more public playtests for the update before release. While I'm glad that there was finally news on the update, this whole situation is concerning, because it not only highlights that SIG can't handle smaller update schedules, like the previous 2-week cadence, but also that they apparently can't handle longer update cycles either. To me, it shows that they have issues scoping, prioritizing, and executing on their ideas for the game. For them to be radio silent for 5 months, since December, apart from the mini patch in February, and then come out after the release window for the patch has come and passed and break their silence only to say, hey, so we don't know when the update will be out, we don't really know what'll be in it, or how many pieces it'll come out, and we may need to playtest it first, just makes me think that they don't have a clue what they're doing. And compared to their communication and what they delivered on last year, it's worryingly different. Before we get more into SIG's communication issues, I wanted to touch on the content of the updates themselves. Earlier I mentioned that, in my opinion, a multiplayer early access game like Marauders needs to balance content updates with refining what's already in the game, and giving people reasons to stick around during development. Putting half-baked features into the game is one thing, but the reality is that players are stuck with them for months at a time, and at a point, you need to stop shoving unfinished things into the game and actually expand on what's already there. SIG mostly seems to focus on the content side of things, adding new maps like Colony Cruiser, Mining Frigate, and Planet Killer, bosses like the Red Baron and the Warden, new weapons, new attachments, etc., along with a few UI and sound changes, which is fine. New content is always appreciated. But, in my opinion, the devs have been absolutely tone-deaf in terms of their recent updates, like guilds. We looked at the numbers earlier. The player base has been declining for months. Why on earth would you release an update like guilds, which gives players the ability to form in-game guilds and run around a hideout with fellow guild members, for a game that's been struggling to hit even 300 average players? Why not do something like rework Zero to Hero, the game's main and only real questline, to give people something to work towards? What about reworking the prestige system? What about focusing on updates and content meant to drive engagement and giving people a reason to play the game instead of going, look, we put a third dart weapon in, and a bunch of weapon attachments you'll never see outside of supply crates? Why do that, instead of making Zero to Hero not the steaming pile of garbage that it currently is? But hey, don't worry, we got the Guilds update for our very small player base, and it was still underwhelming. The Guild Hideout is an addition, I guess. It's kind of pointless, and the Guild Shop has 2 or 3 items in it that are just reskins of gear that you can already get in-game, and nothing else. My point is that pumping a new map and a few new guns into the game every few months hasn't kept the player base healthy so far, but SIG just keeps trying to do the same thing and hoping it'll be different this time, without changing anything. Maybe it's just me, I don't know, but recent updates seem so out of touch with the actual reality of the game and the amount of people playing it that I'm starting to think the developers either don't know what's going on, or if they do, then they don't care. One final example of this is that in February's update, along with the aforementioned animation changes, SIG made a change to how matchmaking works. Previously, when you queued for a game, you had the chance to join an ongoing raid, as in joining a raid late, or what SIG refers to as instant join. While it could sometimes be frustrating joining a raid late and knowing that other players were likely already inside a given POI, it made sure that you were never waiting too long for matchmaking, which was super helpful for a game with a very small amount of players online, especially outside of peak hours. For whatever reason, SIG disabled joining raids late / instant join in that patch, meaning that matchmaking now tries to start a lobby at the same time with as many other players as it can. Why? Who knows? I don't really know why anyone would push that change at that time, considering that in February there were an average of 305 people online at any given time, but hey, what do I know? All I know is that with the player base as small as it is right now, that change means that it takes me way longer to find a game, which seems like a pretty stupid thing to do to your very limited amount of players. Speaking of the devs, let's get back to this whole communication thing, mainly SIG's complete lack of it these days. We've already established that up until October 2023, the devs were great at keeping the community up to date about what they were working on, upcoming updates, and the like. Then Team 17 underwent some pretty serious restructuring, and communication fell apart. I think I've already touched enough on delays not being communicated appropriately regarding the guilds and retribution updates, and I don't want to rehash what I've already said. I also don't want to speculate, because at the end of the day, nobody really has a confirmed reason for why things are the way that they are right now, so I'll keep this short. The most common explanation given for all of this is that contracts and NDAs and legal stuff are what's preventing SIG from being more open with the Marauders community about delays and what's going on in general. Again, I'm not a game dev, but I have 2 opinions here. One, if that is the cause, and the legally binding contract or NDA or whatever you sign prevents you from talking about your game that you're developing, to the extent that you can't say that an update is delayed, then you fucked up. You shouldn't have signed that contract. On the other hand, if all of this isn't Team 17 related and you're just bad at communication all of a sudden for some reason, then that's equally ridiculous. Recently, on May 3rd, before the Retribution update's delay was officially confirmed, Dandy, who's another SIG team member, said the following on Discord in response to a user who said that the lack of communication was driving players away. Quote, "I know Chief, and I know Mac, who's one of the core devs, would like to communicate more, but with their current workflow it leaves little room for it. They've been trying different approaches, hopefully they can adjust and make more time for it." So, the explanation given here is that the main devs are working so hard that in the 5 months since the last actual update, none of them could take even 60 seconds to communicate with their own community team about the state of the update, or to give an update on how it's going that could then be communicated back to the community. And I don't mean to throw any member of the community team or QA teams under the bus here. It really does seem like they're just in the dark as the rest of us are, but goddamn. If the devs are so busy trying to crunch this update out that they can't take a single fucking minute to communicate anything tangible to the rest of their team in months, then Marauders really is in trouble. So, is Marauders dead? Well, no. The servers haven't been taken down, the game is still up for sale, and there's still people playing it, however small that number may be, so the game isn't dead per se. However, I think it's fair to say that it is dying. The player base is getting smaller and smaller, and with the recent announcement about the Retribution update being delayed seemingly indefinitely until SIG can figure out how to get something done enough to release, it shows that SIG either can't or won't communicate with their players, or their own community team for that matter. The player count's in the toilet, and the Discord server has turned into an echo chamber where the 10 people who refuse to face reality and admit that the game is struggling are huffing so much copium it's a wonder they haven't suffocated yet. There really doesn't seem to be a light at the end of the tunnel here. When it comes down to it, either Team 17 is grinding the members of SIG down, they're struggling to finish the update, and not letting them speak openly about development, or SIG is simply struggling to manage their time and resources effectively and refusing to communicate with their own community team and players. Either way, Marauders is a game with great potential, but it's hard to recommend in its current state. I really do hope that the guys over at SIG can pull this game out of the nosedive that it's currently in, because if they don't do it soon, I don't think it'll be around much longer, regardless of what they've said. Thanks for watching.